Hello everyone, welcome to Teh Tarik with Walid, and with me I have a renowned analyst, a political analyst, Dr. Leslie Vinjamuri. She's the CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Am I right?
That's right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so and let's get to it. Since you are based in Chicago, right? So, and we are talking about world affairs. We are here at the WEF. Can we still consider America to be the leader of the free world?
Look, this is a big question. I think that the United States right now, under President Trump, is not behaving as if it's the leader of the free world. It's a very strange moment because, in fact, I would say that President Trump doesn't really seem to want the responsibility nor the opportunity of leading the Western world, the free world, so to speak. But if you go a layer deeper and you look at the structures and you look at the partnerships and the alliances, yes, they are coming under attack beyond a shadow of a doubt for structural reasons, for reasons having to do with the fact that the U.S. president doesn't fundamentally believe in that the structures and the alliances fully serve America's interests. But they are still there, and they are still operative, and they are still operating. So, is the U.S. sort of standing up and talking the talk of leadership, of freedom, of values, of partnerships? No, absolutely not. Not in this moment. But it is still turning up. It turned up to the G7. It will turn up to the Ankara summit. It will turn up to UNGA. It's turning up to a variety of plurilateral, multilateral, regional organizations, not only in the free world, but, globally. So I think that there's sort of a short-term, highly disruptive moment, and then there's a longer-term question, and we have to separate the two.
And we are here in the global south, right? And would you
China,
say
the global south, the second wealthiest, most powerful country in the world.
physical.
And you said the global south, and for a minute I had to think about where was I, because it doesn't really look like the global south.
You're right. So, and would you say there has been a fundamental rethinking of America, which I think it's quite easy to blame it on Donald Trump, but perhaps it began before that as well with Gaza. Do you think that how the rest of the world think about what's going on in Palestine, it's quite different from how maybe the Western world thinks about it? And even in the Western world, there's a lot of fissures right now, right? I saw a poll that for the first time in American history, just before the Iran war started, that the majority of Americans had a favorability rating which is positive of Palestine rather than Israel. So even in the West it's changing. But do you think what has happened since 7 October 2023, it has really taken a hit on the Western world?
Yeah, I mean, okay, there's a lot in that question. So first of all, America's relationship with Israel, that's sort of the one really big question for a lot of people. And there are the level of support for Israel has undoubtedly taken a hit, and it has undoubtedly taken a hit in large part, but not only because of America's policy towards Palestine, towards Gaza, support of Israel, seemingly without conditions in the aftermath of October 7th. And that has really divided Americans. It's alienated a lot of Americans, and it's coming out in the polling. But then there's another thing too, which is that there's a generational change, and this was already taking place. Right. And so younger Americans and younger Jewish Americans don't feel the same level of commitment and attachment to Israel as those who grew up in the aftermath of the Holocaust, of the Second World War. So there are a few different reasons for the change, but there is a change. And you said we're in the global south. Sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the critique and the criticism of the United States came in part because it was seen that America was, at least originally, really rising to support Ukraine after Russia's illegal invasion. And not behaving similarly in support of Palestinians and of Gaza. And it's created all sorts of problems.
And it leads me to the next question, which is, do you think China is the biggest beneficiary of this in terms of where countries rely on, or who countries rely on?
Yeah, so there's sort of a, can you be the beneficiary by default? I think China's actually been very proactive in courting many countries across the global south through obviously Belt and Road and other investments, but really largely through what we might broadly talk about as Belt and Road. Right now, if you listen, we're here in Dalian at the World Economic Forum. We listened to the premier speech yesterday. The language, the words, the message that's coming out of China is one of stability, of cooperation, of wanting to work together. And so it is a different message than what we're hearing from the United States right now. But, and the but is really important, it's undoubtedly the case that a lot of countries would not like to be caught in this trap of aligning with the United States or aligning with China. We know the story, right, across Southeast Asia, across other parts of the world also, but I would say especially in Southeast Asia, that states would like to maintain their autonomy. They would like to be able to have a strong relationship with the United States and with China. They don't want to choose. And so we're sort of seeing this world where, yes, China has more of an opening, but ultimately we're seeing a world of multiple alignments, multi-alignment, right? The states are sort of picking and choosing, and it creates an order such as it is that is less stable, more unpredictable. It might grant more opportunities, but if many states, not all, but many states for a very long period of time benefited on the whole from a rules-based, more predictable, more stable order where there was an attempt to bring states into the multilateral system and to kind of fashion that with a degree of predictability. This world where people are sort of looking for different partnerships and different alignments, it offers some opportunity, but it comes, I think, when you add on top of that the disruption that's coming, the disordering, the dissolution of the international order, it adds a degree of uncertainty that is, fundamentally destabilizing, and it could impact growth, which is, one of the key things that people have been concerned about and talking about here at the World Economic Forum.
Right, absolutely. I just wanted to pick on that a little. You mentioned the disruption of the international order, and that is something that has been mentioned by many people. Especially the abduction of the Venezuelan president and what happened in Iran. But hasn't that always been the case? Hasn't big powers always gotten away with bending the rules, breaking the rules? And not just America and Iraq and so on, but other big countries as well, right? Russia, China. Isn't that a tale as old as time itself, that big powers will behave as big powers are? What is different, you think, fundamentally different about the moment we are in now?
Yeah, yes. You and I have both been students of SOAS. We understand the complexity, the inequalities, the radical hierarchy, and the fact that large powers, great powers, especially the United States, has frequently violated the rules that it helps to create. But I think the current moment isn't the same. And I think it's not the same because it used to be that America would sort of help to set the rules, sovereignty, only certain conditions under which states could use force to protect their borders. Not proactively, not by choice, not to refashion and reconfigure the territorial boundaries of sovereign states. And it's not to say it never happened, but it was generally done with some sort of fiction or some sort of excuse or some sort of justification. And this is wholly different. There just really hasn't been that effort, a little bit in the aftermath. But Venezuela, in the middle of the night, later on, there's this, trial, which isn't only a pretense, but it doesn't justify sort of removing a sitting, albeit not legitimately elected, but still a sitting head of a sovereign state, and with no apology. There's no apology about it. And then I think the bigger play, because a lot of people looked at Venezuela and they thought, well, Maduro was illegitimate and he was oppressing his people and he was destroying his economy. They still don't like what the United States did, but they sort of gave it a pass, a lot of European leaders. But when President Trump made a play for Greenland, I think that's when people could see the gloves were off, that there was no longer this fiction of rules, of really understanding that there are boundaries that can't and shouldn't be crossed in international politics. And so I think that was really a paradigmatic shift for Europeans. They suddenly looked at America and they thought, wow, it's not just them. It's not just Venezuela or, I mean, this came before Iran, of course, but still Iran had been in that bucket. There had been the June war. And they thought, wow, he can come for us. And we've been on the same side, in it together, in this alliance, since 1949. And the gloves are off. And so I think that has been a radical shift. So I don't think it's all the same. I don't think it's always been the same.
So if I get what you're saying, it's different now because Europe realizes that the rules-based order is not as such.
It's partly because America is not discriminating positively on behalf of its allies.
Right.
It's sort of, willing to threaten to use force in ways that are blatantly illegal, not only against its adversaries or against states that are leaders that are not behaving according to international law, but also against leaders that are rightfully elected, democratically elected, are part of the same alliance structure through Denmark, in the case of Greenland, and are behaving legitimately and are on the sort of same side, right? They're in the same organization. So it is this. America's not differentiating between allies and adversaries, between rogue leaders and those who are legitimately complying with international law. And also because there's no justification, in either case, whether it's allies or adversaries or autocrats, there's no attempt to articulate clearly a legitimate reason for using force to alter the boundaries, alter the questions of who leads a country. And that is just fundamentally a game changer.
Right. And where does that leave us with the question that you've been inundated with the whole couple of days, U.S.-China relations? Where does that leave us now? Where are we at? And we've heard a lot about AI in the past couple of days, and U.S. and China are also in an AI race, right? They are in a race about on everything, but on the international front, where are we at now?
Look, this is a moment when I think some people feel a degree of optimism about the United States and China. And I think they feel that because the baseline that had been set was so low for cooperation. The relationship between the United States and China really took a tremendous hit during the pandemic. Remember that President Trump in his first administration blamed China.
Yep.
He called it the China virus. Day in and day out, American public opinion towards China fundamentally hardened, became very negative. It was on the back of a series of behaviors that people attributed to China and felt like were not in keeping with standards. But the relationship for a number of reasons really deteriorated. And President Biden, of course, took what many people saw as a very ideological position against China when he tried to divide the world between democracies and autocracies. Yeah. Talked about competing with China, also trying to cooperate with China, but fundamentally, I think, alienated the Chinese leader.
It's bipartisan, right?
It was bipartisan.
China,
I mean, the bipartisan consensus that China was the number one challenge or indeed threat for the United States really was forged under Trump's first administration, certainly during Biden's administration. And so now there is a little bit of optimism that actually, maybe with this recent summit, that President Trump is opening up some space to stabilize the relationship, to find a landing pad, to begin to try to create opportunities to have a productive conversation. And our panel this morning, Professor Allison of Harvard University, the Harvard Kennedy School, said, 75% of the challenge in this relationship is structural. These are two great powers, China rising, America relatively not as powerful as it once was. And that's just bound to be difficult. But that 25%, whether it goes off the rails or whether it is stabilized, has everything to do with how the choices that people make, the language they use, the diplomacy that they invest in, the relationships that they build or don't. And so it's that 25% where I think that there is some optimism that possibly the United States and China are getting onto a little bit more of a landing pad. But others, as you know, feel that, this is naive, that in fact, President Trump isn't taking seriously the real threat that exists from this technological competition, the real, that there is fundamentally a lack of trust. And so there are mixed views.
So that 75%, can you elaborate on that? So this is the classic Thucydides
Thucydides,
trap. Yeah.
That's right.
There's
the classic
trap.
Thucydides trap. And that when you've got a rising power and a hegemonic power that's in decline, there are debates as to whether the United States is actually in decline. But that when you've got these two overwhelmingly dominant powers in the system, that inevitably there's a struggle, and that the chance that power transition isn't peaceful, that it results in a war, is, structural. 75% of it's structural. There's all sorts of possibility for misperception, mistakes, things going badly wrong, and that's why having good leadership, having good people-to-people ties, managing, investing in that relationship, in those business linkages, is absolutely vital, because it can quickly go off the tracks. We talk about guardrails, putting guardrails on the relationship so it stays on a track, doesn't fall off the edge.
So what will the world look like then in 20, 25 years? Are we looking at something more similar to the Cold War, or is it a different kind of world?
I mean, I think it's wholly different for a couple of reasons. One is the U.S. and Chinese economies are integrated with each other. Both of these countries are fully integrated into the global economy in different ways. Obviously, the U.S. is less integrated on trade, but in other ways it's very integrated. But the two economies, the two countries need each other. They benefit from exchange, whether it's scientific cooperation, research cooperation, business exchange, access to each other's markets, technologies. So there's a lot in there to make them competitive, but there's a lot in there to win. And that's very different from the Cold War. And then the other thing that's very different is we have all these other, emerging powers, India, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, that have a real stake, Southeast Asia, ASEAN, that have a real stake, that are real influencers. They might not be at the level of the great powers, the European Union, but they are very serious economically, politically. They have the ability to influence, to create alternatives. We know the conversation about middle powers that followed from Mark Carney's now famous speech at Davos. And that makes the landscape very, very different.
Okay. So could you paint a picture for us?
Of where we're going 25 years from now? Well, so first of all, I would say, I am not one to believe that whether we put our shoes on frontwards or backwards, left to right, I think it matters what we do. Our choices matter. Right. I'm not a structuralist. Right. Of course, there are structural trends that have to be managed. But at the end of the day, I'm of the firm belief that it matters who we choose as our leaders. It matters what choices our leaders make. That great women and men can change the course of history fundamentally. We've seen it before. We could see it again. That there are shocks to the system that we can't anticipate. COVID was one of them, not the only one. And so I'm not deterministic about where we're headed. But I do think that there are some pressure points to watch. And the biggest one is whether the United States and China can manage their relationship, whether they can continue to have a conversation not only about technology, not only about the rules of the road for trade, and the questions that are really difficult, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's the Russia-China relationship, whether it's America's behavior in Iran, its upsetting of the choke points through its attacks and Iran's subsequent use of the Strait of Hormuz as a lever. Those conversations have to be managed. Those choices really change where we're going. But I think that we're heading towards a world which is, unlike a lot of people, I think we're heading towards a bipolar world, not a multipolar world, but a bipolar world, two poles, the United States and China, in which a number of other countries have a degree of autonomy, have a degree of power, and choose to play the field, right? They're going to be constantly seeking to have multiple alignments, to form trade agreements with each other, to move different issues forward, coalitions of the willing. I think that's where we are, and I think it's where we're going to be for a very long time to come. I don't think we're moving into a world of two blocks, and I also don't think we're genuinely moving into a world of multipolarity, because no other third state comes anywhere close to having the kind of power that the United States and China do.
You mentioned personalities, but Donald Trump is a cause, but he's also a symptom of many things, right? And Trumpism will be here to stay, unfortunately, even after Donald Trump is gone. So wouldn't those, and we mentioned earlier that some anti-China sentiments are really bipartisan in the States. So wouldn't the choice of the next leader not matter as much, given those structural factors?
No, I think it matters completely, absolutely, hugely. I think that Donald Trump, yes, there are structural reasons that made it possible for President Trump to mobilize white men who'd lost their jobs or weren't living the standard of life that they'd been hoped to achieve. That made them more susceptible to a populist narrative, and made many Americans more susceptible to a narrative of the need to put America first and to be more transactional and more willing to tolerate the unpredictability. Sure. However, I don't think that Donald Trump is somebody who would be easy to recast in another mold. I think he's very singular. I think that, elections absolutely matter. Who we choose as our leaders absolutely can change the course of history. And sure, there are people who on the MAGA part of the Republican Party who are very supportive of President Trump for a variety of reasons. But that doesn't mean that Trumpism is here to stay. It means that there's a struggle for the future of the United States. It's one of the most salient, relevant, and quite frankly, interesting political conversations in the world right now. Which direction is America going internally, and what will its choices therefore be globally? It's undoubtedly the case that the country is very divided and polarized. But there is also, in moments of great crisis, there are tremendous opportunity for people to move the needle. And even if you go back to the 75%, 25%, 25% is a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It can transform the course of history.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a huge amount. So leadership matters. What we do matters. And leadership matters at the top, and it matters at every level of society also.
Right. Maybe we'll see more Mamdanis than Trumps. Right?
Yeah, so maybe. That's a tough sell. But, for many people, this really is very promising. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of enthusiasm, especially amongst many young Americans, not all New Yorkers. But we'll see. Will America choose a progressive? Will they choose a moderate leader? Will they choose a Democrat, Republican, man, woman? I mean, there's a lot on the table there.
It comes from perhaps the same kind of anti-establishment sentiments, right? The rise of people like Trump, Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Mamdani. Even though they may be very different, but there is a feeling of the establishment has left us behind.
Yeah.
And my worry is that kind of anti-establishment sentiment is just going to be exacerbated with AI, not just in America, but in many parts of the world where, people were booing at the convocation ceremonies. And these are people who use AI all the time in their lives as well. But there is a complicated relationship that humans have now with AI, because they sort of understand the displacement that can come with it. And it seems to me that the ordinary person feels that AI is being pushed down our throats, shoved down our throats all the time. And I'm thinking, just as a political scientist, doesn't this lead to more anti-establishment sentiments throughout? Whether it's in America, whether it's throughout the world. Do you see more of that?
It does. I think you're right that in general, people tend to reject the status quo.
Yeah.
They're rejecting their leaders. They're sort of feeling in opposition to many of their leaders. There's a sense the system isn't working, that it's not delivering, as you've mentioned, that it's creating grave inequalities, that it's not fair. And the young Americans, and possibly elsewhere too, but I know the American case best, young Americans are very, very worried about artificial intelligence.
Yep.
They're hearing their leaders tell them their jobs will be lost.
Yes.
They're tired of it. They don't like it. It's going to be a huge electoral issue for young voters. However, and this is where you have to believe in people, right? You have to believe in choices. There is lots of scope for a national conversation about what the boundaries should be, of whether AI should be allowed to displace people or whether it could be harnessed to make people have a better life, be more productive, give them more free time, make them more intelligent. You know, there's a conversation there. It must be had. It's absolutely vital that this is, you know, at the front and center of political leadership. But we shouldn't be, I don't think we should be pessimistic. I think we should be we need to have a sense of absolute urgency about the moment that we're in. We need to bring people on board. We need to bring them into the collective, the institutions, and help them feel that their voice matters, that they're part of this conversation, that they will influence the choices of their leaders going forward.
I was actually going to close with asking you for something optimistic, but you already did that. And I would say not just a sense of urgency, but a sense of agency as well. We cannot just think,
agency is
we
critical.
cannot just think that, oh, this conversation is done, right? But we need to contribute to shaping the boundaries of this conversation, right? Where AI, what are the boundaries? What should it be used for? What are its negative effects? Thank you so much, Dr. Leslie. It was such a pleasure. Hopefully the world will turn out as great as you described.
Well, we have to hope.
We have to hope. That's all we have.
And that's why we come to Davos,
That's
to the
all we
World
have.
Economic Forum, in order to create the solutions. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Okay.